From name-calling tweets to camera-free press briefings, what is really going on between President Trump and the national media? And Detroit 1967, why it's important to reflect on that painful summer 50 years ago. Today is Sunday, July 2nd, 2017, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint, a belated Happy Canada Day, and we'll celebrate American independence this week. For a long time, one of my favorite stories about July 4th, 1776 was that King George III was said to have written in his diary, "Nothing important happened today." Great story, isn't it? Trouble is, it's not true. It became a kind of American folklore, but it was apparently confused with a diary entry of the French king Louis XVI. But many of us repeated that story for years until finally a British historian pointed out that King George III never kept a diary. So I guess you'd say it had become a kind of fake news. Yes, fake news, things that aren't true, things that never happened. Not to be confused with things you don't agree with or things you don't think are worthy of coverage. We've talked about that before on Flashpoint. But after the week that was, here I am again, deeply concerned about the war on the press. We're in the middle of a profoundly important debate on health care, but to read the president's Twitter feed or to listen to Rush Limbaugh or watch Sean Hannity, you'd swear the biggest topic in America is the mainstream media. The White House makes serious claims about chemical weapons in Syria, and the president is tweeting about CNN. His own travel ban is poised to take effect, and he's sending out a nasty tweet about MSNBC's Mika Brzezinski. Meanwhile, cameras are being excluded from the daily White House press briefing on a fairly frequent basis. And there, too, when the briefing gets underway, you can count on a smear of the media. Are mistakes made in coverage? Yes, of course. But the reporting that the Washington Post has been doing the last few months makes me proud to be a journalist. And it should make you proud to live in a nation where that kind of journalism is possible and practiced. We're going to talk about that this morning. And 50 years now since that summer of 1967 in Detroit, how do we best mark that moment? It's all this morning on Flashpoint. I'm not sure that the storytellers are ever comfortable being the story, but that certainly feels like where we are. Let's talk about that with this morning's roundtable. Good to have with me this morning the editorial page chief of the Detroit Free Press, Stephen Henderson, the founder of Densar Consulting, Dennis Darnoy. Back with us again, Dennis. Thanks for coming. The host of My Week on Detroit Public TV, Christy McDonald, is here. In fact, we've got the entire cast of My Week here because Nolan Finley, editorial page editor of the Detroit News, is here as well. Thank you all very much for coming. Stephen, let me start with you. For weeks, months now actually, I've wondered if we were ever going to start to venture out of our silos because right now people seem to be content to only surround themselves with information that reinforces what they already believe. Yeah. We don't seem to be leaving our cloisters. Witness this week. No, right. I mean, I think you're seeing a pretty concerted and consistent effort out of this White House, one that doesn't look like other White Houses we've seen in modern times, that is about making an enemy of the press and doing that in a systematic way, doing that in a strategic way that plays to the base. I think that supports the president. He knows they don't like us much, don't put much faith. It's effective, isn't it? In what we say. I think it has been. But you know, at bottom, it's a dishonest campaign. I mean, it is built on lies and manipulation. Now, I think we are at fault for taking the bait too often, sometimes jumping at some of these things he says and indulging the conversation about things that are meaningless instead of focusing on the things that are meaningful. But the bigger issue here really is the behavior of this White House and whether it can be normalized in any way anytime soon. Yeah. Well, Christy, the phrase taking the bait. This tweet on Mika Brzezinski causes huge turmoil all over our front pages and newscasts, and yet it means we're not talking about health care. Yeah, well, but I almost think, how can you not take the bait when the president is communicating in this way and using the language that he used, because it goes directly to how he communicates and what his judgment is. So if we are
looking at him to say what will his judgment be and what will his communication be with other countries and talking with other people and trying to make policy and trying to negotiate. This is what he's showing. This is how he's doing it. And he may be talking about a cable news host, but it could be about the leader of a country next week. So I think we do have to cover that. But I do think sometimes the media, we have to pull back a little bit on the hand-wringing, what I like to call it.
Well, Dennis, this is really, there's a kind of brilliance some people see at work here, because for Donald Trump to say to his supporters, "Don't believe anything you hear about me," is pretty smart. So far, I'm not sure any of those people are believing what they hear about him.
No, he did it in the campaign. I mean, he paints the messenger. So whether it's Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, or CNN, he
Little
puts,
Marco.
Right, Little Marco.
Low energy Jeb.
Anything they say doesn't have resonance with his supporters because he's already told them they're going to lie to you. And then he'll support it with some sketchy facts that his supporters believe, but it's a great job of tainting the jury pool, if you will.
But is it dangerous?
Oh, it's certainly.
Are you concerned?
It's dangerous if you are one who values democracy or freedom of the press. If your values are to keep an approval rating or to have your base support you, it's not. So it depends on what your value system is in terms of how you judge his performance.
Nolan, how do we in the press earn our way out of this fix?
Well, I think the first thing we do is pay attention to our own standards and our own professional ethics. And I've been very disturbed over the last several months at my profession. I think we've seen some things that are very sloppy, and this over-reliance on anonymous sources that are unvetted. The Washington Examiner, I looked at their running tally this morning of all the things we've gotten wrong, and in most cases it's because we were just sloppy and we forgot our standards and you know, relied on sources we didn't vet, and in many cases just reported things in too big a hurry to get it right. And I think we've got, and when you're facing a president like this who'll say and do anything, you've got to take the higher ground. And I do think we need to remember our mission is to hold politicians accountable, scrutinize what they're doing, inform our readers. Our mission is not to discredit, and I think too much of what we're doing is aimed at discrediting rather than informing.
Stephen, I'm kind of at wit's end over the definition of fake news. In fact, somebody tweeted to me this week, because apparently Twitter is trying to figure out a way to filter out and help people flag fake news, and I tweeted out a link to that, and somebody tweeted back to me, well, you can tell it's fake news if it's anything from the New York Times or CNN, which drives me into a kind of insanity.
Right.
How do we change that nomenclature, if nothing else?
I'm not sure we can change the nomenclature. I think you know, in a world where social media and shorthand really rule a lot of people's frameworks for understanding the world around them, it's really hard to reclaim slogans like fake news. I mean, the president owns that, and we are silly, I think.
Maybe we should put a trademark around it now.
Right, just leave it alone. What I think the key for us is to deal with the things that matter that come out of this White House more frequently than the things that don't, and make it clear why we're not doing the things that don't matter, why we're not paying attention to those. I also think it's really important to push back against the things that do matter out of this White House. So when he's telling lies, I mean, there was a great running list of all the lies this president has told in the 6 months he's been around. It was either in the New York Times or the Washington Post. I think that's valuable. I think it's valuable to point out that...
But valuable to the people who are reading the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Yeah, well, that's still...
You've got a lot of people who don't trust it.
That's still more people, though, than are following some of these sites that have no fidelity to truth at all. I also think it's important to point out that this is a White House that is holding hostage the people's information, right, in a way that other White Houses have not. And why that's damaging to the democracy, not to the press. Too often what we're saying is what he's doing is hurting us, and not putting it in the context of this hurts the republic.
I'm not sure, Dennis, I'm ready to give up ownership of the idea of fake news. Now that if we're going to come to understand that every election cycle that we have now, somebody somewhere, foreign and domestic, will be trying to influence things by spreading what I would consider false news, I'm not sure we can just give up on on that idea.
Sure, I think both Nolan and Christie hit a point, though, and it goes to credibility. When you look at how people view news right now, it is split along a partisan divide, and greater than it has ever been. So there are going to be Republicans, if you will, taking in news and saying, no, I'm going to follow one source and this is what I believe, and anything counter to that is false. And so I'm not sure I agree with you, if I'm speaking from a Republican standpoint, that Russia meddled in the election. So, I mean, you know, when you have to argue over certain basic facts to just lay down a foundation, I mean, it really, you know, kills the conversation.
You know, Devin, what I think is also really interesting, too, is when we talk about media, so many things are intermixed. So people see the media, or they think about Sean Hannity, and they say, well, he's the journalist. Well, he's really a commentator. And so, and when you see that Last Supper lineup on CNN, when you've got 8 people all sitting out there, that's what I call it, and, you know, they're commentators, and they're giving their opinion, and people hear that, and they take that as fact. So what's happening is CNN, the Washington Post, Local 4 News, PBS, the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press, we're all being lumped in as the same media focus, which I think is very, very difficult. So to kind of pick up on Nolan's point, he's making a face at me, so I think he's going to disagree with me in a moment. But to pick up on a point that we have to do our jobs a bit better, we have to expand our scope of coverage. We have to go to not the usual suspects. Every time we're doing a story, we say we get the same kind of 3 people that kind of speak for everyone. We need to expand a little bit more, and I think that's what we talked about coming out of the election, and I think it's what we still continue to need to do.
I completely agree with you on we could use more reporting and less analysis, which is what we see so much of on camera.
Yeah, but you can't blame the public for confusing the two, because if you look on the Twitter feed of journalists, including journalists who cover the president and cover the White House, over and over you're seeing their personal opinions expressed on social. A lot, Devin.
Well,
you're seeing their person.
And people like you and Stephen and a lot of people in the journalism world work in the editorial end of our business.
I am talking about
most
the
of us, however, who are just reporters and journalists.
I am talking about the reporter.
Opinion business.
Disagree. I talk about the. You're not, but I talk. You see, look at Twitter. You look at the social media. People who are covering the White House, and over you're seeing their personal opinion expressed. That hurts our credibility. I think we should stick to covering the news. If you're a reporter, keep your opinions to yourself. That's the way we grew up, and I don't see that being exercised.
I mean, I think there is some blurring of lines that's taking place. I think it's primarily in the cable news sphere, what Christie's talking about. It's not only that you have people sitting there giving analysis alongside people who are reporters. You also now have people who work outside of journalism who are sitting there telling what their opinion is, and it's unclear what anybody's role really is. I think print media have been way better about this since this president has been around. I think the Times, I think the Post, you look at what Maggie Haberman, who is covering this president for the New York Times, has done through social media, through traditional media, on television and on radio. She's really trying to give people an idea of how unusual this is and how extraordinary it may be and how much of a threat it might be. And I don't think that's a personal opinion. That is her observation of what's going on. And that's important because she's there. She's there every day, and we are.
Dennis, as a consultant, when you're reading just the reporting that we're talking about, not the editorial page, do you feel like you're seeing a lot of opinion? Is that what you see?
I do. I feel that there is an inflection of personal opinion, and then if you are someone like a Trump or a Trump supporter, you point that out. You point that personal bias, and again, that taints the jury, because you can find something that person has personally disagreed with, the president or your particular candidate or party, and say, how can you trust this individual? He personally or she personally feels this way, and it infects their reporting.
It's interesting because I think that part of that is social media's sort of function, the way that it's put together. I can remember when going back years ago, when they came to me and said, we need you to start tweeting and being on Facebook.
You start getting out there, and, it's difficult.
It's difficult to do it without feeling like you're drawing on your own well of thought.
But I think that there's also a difference between someone who is covering the White House and seeing the stream of tweets that he did about Mika Brzezinski and saying, wow, that exhibited poor judgment, because that is, I mean, I think that's something that a lot of us can agree.
But you don't think your readers and viewers can't figure that out for themselves if you just tell them what happened? I don't think you need, as a reporter, to add the editorial commentary. And let's remember, I mean, this ridiculous tirade, and I'm a commentator, I feel comfortable saying that Trump went on yesterday morning, was triggered in part by personal criticism of him by Mika Brzezinski, where she said, this man's crazy, he's going to ruin the world. Tune in at 5 o'clock for the news. I mean, how does somebody who reads that and comes to that station at 5 o'clock believe that news is objective and not slanted to confirm her opinion? I think that's the danger.
Well, but see, I mean, I think it's difficult when you have somebody, again, who's acting so strangely. How do you not call that out?
That's when your standards are most important. You can't let him drag you down. I mean, other presidents have gone to war with the press, maybe not to this extreme, but you can't take that bait.
I got to leave it there. Gang, thank you all very much for the thoughts. Great conversation. Thanks to my week for coming in. Thanks, everybody at Detroit Public Television. When we come back, we'll talk about Detroit 67. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Thank you.
Flashpoint is brought to you by DFCU Financial.
Welcome back. As you know, it is the 50th anniversary of that infamous summer of 1967 in Detroit. The new exhibit commemorating that moment opened last week at the Detroit Historical Society. You've got some time to see it. It'll be there for quite a while, but I wanted to talk this morning with the two men responsible for that exhibit, which is actually much more than just what's contained in the Historical Society, as we'll talk about. But Bob Burry and Marlo Stoudemire are here. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I want to talk first about the reaction that you've heard so far. I know you both, and I know there was an awful lot of pressure that you were both feeling as you were putting this together, the enormous responsibility of it and the way that it was going to be received. But what have you heard so far, Bob?
So far, the reaction that we've got has been really positive, and it's really, maybe positive is a good word, but it's also very affirming that we did it the right way, because we've been working at this for 2.5 years. And one of the things we decided that we couldn't tell the story by ourselves. We had to engage so many people to make sure that we were true to what was really the title of the exhibition, Perspectives. Right. We talked to 500 people. You can go on our website and hear 500 stories, all different perspectives of how it affected them, how it affected their families, what they heard about it, all those types of things.
Marlo, right out of the gate, though, you found the sensitivities were everywhere. It was fraught with complications. The last time you were on the program, we were talking about what do we even call it? Are we comfortable saying the riots of '67, the rebellion, all these little trap doors are all over the place on this?
Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to dispel some myths and provide as much comprehensive and accurate information as possible so people can make some decisions for themselves. We tackle that right up front at the beginning of the exhibition with different terms of rebellion, riot, uprising, so people can really understand the technical terms for that, and then flipping people to a space where they understand how language matters in terms of how you frame a discussion like that. I think more than anything, what's been surprising to me is the number of people who walk through and take our survey in terms of what they call it, and then the results at the end, and some of them have changed their minds based on the information that's provided. It's
an interesting line to walk here, because while you want to be very comprehensive and I think challenging, you also do have the danger of offending people who lived through it, were there, see it in a different way. I did talk to one person who's been through it, Bob, who felt that it was a little too safe. I think they wanted to walk out feeling, I'm not sure angry, but challenged. So, but this is you're trying to thread an interesting needle here.
It is, and it's important the way you do it too. We knew that, a lot of historical museum exhibits in the past are facts and figures, pictures, what they call in the business, books on the wall. You don't have to do that anymore to stay relevant. So what we tried to do is create immersive experiences. And we based those immersive experiences on what people remembered. They remembered really the very terrifying experience on the streets. They remembered tanks. Yeah. They remember burning and the smell of smoke.
A lot of people have very olfactory memories of that.
So we recreated that experience, and we thought it would be better to recreate it rather than show what are some often kinds of pretty discouraging videos that a lot of people have seen. There's not a lot of interest in that. We always tried, the filter we put through was not to whitewash it or not to make it a single perspective, but leave people thinking, okay, that's part of who we are. How do we move forward?
At the other end of the spectrum, Marlo, you've got people going, look, things are happening right now in Detroit. The city's got such a comeback going. Why do we want to wallow in this really bad chapter that's best left forgotten? To which you say,
we're not wallowing in it. Actually, we're using history as a catalyst for people to find their role in the present. A lot of people are trying to connect to that narrative of Detroit's revitalization and comeback, and I think we have some unfinished business, and that's telling our stories and why they matter, which is the Historical Society's mission. I think the part that you talked about in terms of, it's not challenging enough. What people have to understand is this is a 5-year initiative. It's a broader community engagement project that includes a book that dives very deep with 32 different essays from different authors who go deep. It also includes community programming that's inside the museum and outside the museum, and over 100 community partners who have expertise to go deep. And so we believe that if we don't tell our story, someone else will come in. And that's why we talk about the oral histories kind of being the soundtrack of the exhibition, because we use those thoughts, those perspectives to bring it full circle so people can truly understand what Detroit has been, what happened, and where we're going.
The exhibition is really a doorway into a lot of different things. I know that's your hope. Some people, and I'll let you both address this though, would say we haven't come very far. We remain a very segregated city. We remain, in fact, some people felt that the RTA vote was kind of a statement, a testimony on how far we are on our divides.
Well, that is a perception that a lot of people or some people have, and to me that just affirms again or validates the reason for doing this.
Yeah.
So let's look back. What have we done in the past 50 years? And make no mistake, we've done some really good things over the past 50 years. I think we'd all agree. But one of the reactions that I expect many people have when they go through the exhibition is maybe going forward we should do more of this and less of that. Because if we repeat the past, and I think Mayor Duggan did such a great job with that at Mackinac, if we repeat the past, we're destined to just repeat it.
So yes, and we should also pay attention to the fact that we're creating a model. Our model is called ERA, Engage, Reflect, and Act. We're trying to get people to a place where that history, the level of reflection and detail behind it, understanding where we are today, understanding that we got a lot of work to do, will provoke people to take action and do exactly what Bob talked about. The other thing is the Detroit story is America's story. Right? If you look at what's happening across the rest of the country, there's a lot of challenges, right? And so I grew up in a neighborhood where you fell down, you got up, and you kept going. And you don't cry for spilled milk. You know what? There's a lot of issues, but I'm into rolling up my sleeves and challenging that head on. And so it's a call to action to the community to come together and figure out how we can do something differently. Yeah, the problems are there, and believe me, we understand that, and we heard it loud and clear from the community. That's why as our role as the conveners is so important to bring everybody to the table and say, Devin, what's your role? Bob, what's your role? And Marlo, what's your role?
Which is why it'll be a long time before you can measure your own success here, right, Bob, the impact.
Yeah, but that's part of the plan, though, which back to Marlo's statement about being a model. We're measuring perceptions when people come in and when people leave. We're also collecting people's hopes and dreams for the next 50 years. Right. That's why the framing of this 150 years, back to 1917, out to 2067. So we will have some both qualitative and quantitative data about what it'll take through the exhibition output as well as some of the ancillary things we're doing like the Leadership Summit about what does it take to move forward.
I recommend you get involved in the conversation, and that's a good starting point at the Detroit Historical Society on Woodward Avenue. Gentlemen, thanks for being back here again.
Thanks for having us.
We'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this. Thanks so much for spending part of your holiday weekend with us, whether you're in the U.S. or Canada. Celebrate your independence. Thanks so much. Meet the Press coming up next, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. See you next time on Flashpoint.